In the chilling month of January 1987, a thick blanket of snow draped the village, blanketing it in white. Each day, the villagers ventured out into the frosty world to wage their battle against the relentless snowfall. Amidst this winter chore, toiling with an ancient shovel, was a not-so-skinny yet determined young woman. Naomi had arrived in the village, seeking solace with her 2-year-old daughter, Ruth, and her beloved grandmother, with the intention of making it a permanent home. From her vantage point on the porch, Grandma, bundled in a worn shawl atop her fur coat, observed her granddaughter as she cleared the snow from the gate, her expression tinged with melancholy. "Naomi, take it easy, there's no need to strain yourself," urged Grandmother. "It's a labor of love," Naomi replied, her eyes fixed on the picturesque scene. "Just look at this beautiful weather, the glistening trees, and the warm sunlight. It's so inviting, it's almost as if it's calling me to stay. Perhaps we can sing your favorite song together," Naomi suggested, breaking into song with enthusiasm. A small, serene smile spread across Grandma's face as she joined in, softly murmuring the lyrics of their cherished old tune. Unbeknownst to her, her weathered, colorless lips curved into a gentle smile. Naomi had fled her marriage and tied the knot with Kevin 3 years earlier. Back when she was just a 4th-year college student, her parents had objected vehemently, urging her to wait 2 more years until she had her diploma and had gotten to know Kevin better. But Naomi had been swept off her feet by love and couldn't resist the allure of a charismatic man who was nearly a decade her senior. Employed as a supervisor at a dairy, Kevin never failed to surprise her with gifts, some so rare they couldn't be found in any store. He spoke with a charm that seemed straight out of a movie script. On one particular morning, as Naomi sat in the midst of a lecture, an unexpected wave of sickness washed over her. She knew she couldn't ignore it, so she quietly excused herself and made her way to the nurse's station. Concerned, she described her symptoms to the nurse, who, after a brief examination, recommended she see a gynecologist. The following day, when Kevin learned of Naomi's visit to the gynecologist and the surprising news that she was expecting a child, he took swift action. Without hesitation, he accompanied Naomi to the registry office to formalize their commitment. Just 1 month later, they stood before the officiant, exchanging vows and becoming husband and wife. Naomi's parents, while they did attend the registration ceremony, wore expressions that concealed their true feelings. Their joy was overshadowed by unease, and as time went on, their reservations about the situation only seemed to deepen. Following their wedding, Kevin wasted no time in insisting that Naomi retrieve her documents from the institute. He made it clear that he hadn't married her for the purpose of having some students gawk at his wife. Now, as she waits for her husband to return from work, Naomi is devoted to making their home warm and inviting. To her, coziness means cleaning, preparing delicious meals, and ensuring she greets her husband with an obligatory smile upon his return. She takes genuine pleasure in these tasks, although they come with the caveat that Kevin's work sometimes keeps him out late into the night. Regardless of her own fatigue or condition, Naomi faithfully waits for Kevin, ready with a hot dinner to welcome him home. The sky above seemed to remain silent, reluctant to admonish him for his frequent lateness and drunken arrivals. "I'm the head of this family, the boss," slurred Kevin, his eyes narrowed from the alcohol's influence, as Naomi dared to question his prolonged absences. "I'm the one bringing in the money, and that's absolutely none of your concern. You'd do well to stay out of my life. If you ever inquire about my whereabouts again, I'll resort to violence. And don't even think about seeking help from anyone," he warned ominously. He squeezed Naomi's shoulder forcefully and she squirmed in pain into a ball and cried. Kevin grinned and kissed her roughly on the lips. In the morning he was as affectionate and friendly to his wife as if nothing had happened. Naomi thought that Kevin must have just had a rough day and calmed down. But a few days later he came in very late again, and his wife didn't wait for him and fell asleep. That's when Kevin roughly pulled her off the bed and slapped her on the cheek. Naomi was frightened and didn't realize anything. She grabbed her face, but her husband forcefully dragged her naked into the kitchen and ordered her to set the table. That's when she realized that Kevin wasn't as nice as she thought he was. She soon learned that he was already living with another girl who had run away from him before the wedding and traveled very far away. Naomi didn't tell her parents about everything, as she didn't want to hear any well-deserved reproaches. By then, the delivery date was approaching. and she hoped that the baby would soften Kevin's heart. However, he failed to be a loving father and became angry when daughter Ruth was born. He berated Naomi, saying that she couldn't even give birth to a man. 2 difficult years passed, and Naomi had almost forgotten that she had once loved Kevin. Her one and only joy was her little daughter Ruth, who was growing up cheerful and talkative. Looking at her daughter, Naomi found comfort. One day Kevin came home with a fat man in front of whom he fawned. Naomi was disgusted. She quickly set the table for them and went to put Ruth to bed. She sat next to her daughter and was afraid she would miss it if her husband called for her. Soon she heard Kevin yell and quickly entered the room where the drunken men were already sitting. She looked at her husband with trepidation. "Get undressed quickly and don't ask any unnecessary questions," he ordered. Though she couldn't believe her ears, Naomi jerked back, resisting. But Kevin began to peel off her robe. The man watched the scene with interest, and it was obvious that he was enjoying it. Naomi tried to keep her clothes on and didn't scream, afraid that her daughter would wake up and see the nightmare. But when only her panties were left on, she bit her husband's hand in frustration. For that he forcefully slapped her face. But Kevin grinned and said that was enough for today and they would continue tomorrow night. Later, before leaving, Kevin roughly took Naomi by the chin and told her right to her face that the man from the DA's office could put him away for embezzlement and she better not argue. He told her to set the table and clean herself up, buy something nice to eat, and go to the hairdresser. At that, he wrinkled his nose squeamishly and left. Naomi stood there for a long time, afraid to even breathe. She didn't know what to do. But when Ruth began to demand attention, she came to her senses and decided to pack. Gathering a large bag, Naomi took the money her husband had given her, her papers, and picked up her daughter from the maternity hospital. Determinedly she walked out of the hated apartment. Naomi was embarrassed to go to her parents' house since she knew Kevin could have found them. So she went to her grandmother's house in a small village. Those 7 days she spent there seemed like the happiest of her life. She had no fear that her husband would find them, since she had never told him about her grandmother. She felt completely safe here. Naomi enjoyed stoking the stove and cooking borscht on it. She took care of Ruth and shoveled snow in the yard, all the while humming like she had 3 years ago. Before this creepy family life, while shoveling snow, Naomi bumped her shovel on the driveway and was astonished to see the shovel's tip easily break in half. Her grandmother advised Naomi to go to a neighbor who, though strange, was a good man and could fix the shovel. Naomi took both parts of the shovel and went through the snowdrifts to the neighbor's house. Everything there had already been shoveled clean of snow. "I wish someone would help me like that," thought the girl and shuddered. No, better without helpers. She boldly opened the door and cautiously asked, "Anybody home?" No one answered her. Then Naomi walked across the porch and peered into the room. At the table with his back to her sat a man in an oversized gray knit sweater. He did not react in any way to the noise at the door and continued to eat something. Naomi remembered her grandmother's words that the neighbor was not scary, but very good, and boldly went over and clapped him on the shoulder. What happened next, she did not realize at once. In a second, the girl was clasped by the strong hands of a man who was already standing in the middle of the room. A chair was lying off to the side, and a small, overgrown, stubbled man with a burnt face was laughing in the doorway. "Danielle, come on, that's kind of our neighbor. I've seen her before," he said, letting Naomi go. "Yeah, let go. You're going to run the girl over." Daniel looked guiltily into the face of an astonished but somehow not frightened Naomi, and blushed. "Sorry, I'm out of habit." Naomi couldn't take her eyes off the giant. So big, he remained like a child, and his eyes were kind-hearted. She wanted to look into them and not look away. She remembered how he held her tightly in his arms and smiled. It felt good to argue about something. Daniel fussed. "Would you like some tea? And I found some dried currant leaves. Brewed some. We've got lambs too. Help yourself." Naomi didn't refuse. She didn't want to leave. Daniel poured her hot and fragrant tea into a huge mug and added sugar generously. She didn't mind, only watched the deft movements of his huge hands as if mesmerized. In a few minutes they were talking like old acquaintances. Naomi complained to her new friends about her woes of marriage, and the neighbor told them that Daniel had been in the military. A good soldier, but Daniel had been wounded and had to leave the service. He healed up at home and got married right away. He always dreamed of having children of his own, but it didn't work out. A year later, his wife, as if mad, began to constantly scandalize, especially in front of strangers. One day she disappeared. The police found her things on the riverbank with traces of her blood and Daniel's watch next to it. There were witnesses who said they heard Daniel threatening his wife. He tried to prove to everyone that he had done nothing wrong, that he loved her very much, but he was arrested anyway. The psychiatrist had talked to him for only a few minutes and had already concluded that his psyche was disturbed by his participation in the fighting, that he was used to death and could easily kill a man. All his friends and acquaintances were outraged. They knew that he would never hurt a fly. In addition, he was sincerely worried about his wife and begged everyone to look for her, in case she was in trouble. It also turned out that she had borrowed a lot of money from his friends without telling her husband. Probably someone threatened him, but no one listened, and soon the court handed down a 9-year sentence for murdering his wife. Daniel served 42 months. But 9 months ago, his wife was accidentally met by his friends in Moscow. It turned out that she had collected money from acquaintances and simply ran away with her lover, faking her death and framing her husband. The police decided to solve the case quickly, and so Daniel ended up in prison. After letting him go, on his way home he stopped by his friend, who was Naomi's neighbor, and said that something had drawn him here, so he couldn't resist. So he didn't go to his mother's house. He went to his friend's. Daniel poked his friend in the shoulder with a weak fist, but he didn't even notice the blow. Daniel looked at Naomi, and it seemed like he hadn't even heard what his friend was saying about him. Naomi loved the way Daniel looked at her with admiration and tenderness. Her husband never looked at her like that. She didn't even notice as she softly hummed, "Daniel, Daniel, where is your smile?" He heard and suddenly looked intently into her eyes. "I know why I came here at last," he uttered in a hoarse voice. Then he took the 2 halves of the cuttings, put them together, and showed them to the girl. "It seems to me that this is us, broken, but still very much capable of being happy." Daniel left with Naomi. He dusted her yard of snow, made a snowslide for Ruth, but he also chopped firewood. He shook off the snow and suddenly asked Naomi to marry him. Naomi turned him down out of surprise, not because she was still married, but because she was afraid of being rushed again. Daniel said nothing, not at all. He didn't even get upset, just left. But you realize a man like that doesn't give up that easily. A few days later, he returned with his mom, and together they still persuaded the girl to agree. Naomi filed for divorce. Kevin was already under investigation for embezzlement at the factory, so they were divorced quickly and without problems. Danielle and Naomi stayed to live with her grandmother in her house and built a new house in the backyard. They gave birth to 2 more boys, and all their lives they kept that very shovel, which joined 2 broken souls and gave them happiness.